Okay, we're getting to the fall, that time of year when churches move into budgeting and want to take a look at the plans for next year. I'll tell you a little story about a local congregation that wanted to build a new church building. They felt they were quite familiar with building and decided that they would just go ahead and build it. They really didn't need any drawings or the architect to help them, and so they went ahead. They built the foundation only to discover that it ended up on the other neighbor's property, crossing property lines. But they went ahead and weren't going to be deterred and built the walls only to discover when they were finished painting the walls that they had forgot about light switches and electrical outlets. You say, well, that's kind of a silly story and nobody would ever do that. And that's probably quite true. But in terms of churches' finances, that's what dozens of churches do every year. They just go out and they spend it, and they have no plan. I want to talk to you about putting a plan together. It's usually called a budget, but for our purposes we'll just call it a spending plan. The reason for a spending plan is that it helps you prioritize and focus your planning. We should never try and put together a budget without already knowing what you want to accomplish. You should have a plan for the church, have a vision for the church, have the goals that flow out of that vision, because your budget plan, your spending plan, is actually going to put numbers to that vision. So it's going to help you with your focus of your planning. A plan is going to help you be proactive rather than reactive. If there's one thing I hear from a lot of pastors these days, is that they get all kinds of appeals coming across their desk for funds. But if you have a plan in place and it's put there in accordance with your vision and your goals, then you can say to those appeals, we appreciate what you have and we appreciate what you're doing, but within the context of our plan and our vision, it just doesn't fit at this time, but we'll keep you in mind for maybe another time. So you're able to be more proactive rather than just reacting to appeals as they come along. Secondly, a good plan will give you a basis for evaluating. You have your plan on one side, you have your actual on the other side, and you, as you're going along, you can do a comparative between what is actually taking place and what your plan was. And you can see if you're meeting the expectations as far as income or as far as expenditures are concerned, or whether things are getting out of line and you need to make some adjustments. Another value of a budget plan is that it provides controls and gives authorizations. You can control what is being spent. You know no one is going to be spending more than the monies that are coming in. And secondly, those who are doing the spending, they can do so with it, knowing that the authorization is behind them, because the plan has been set with the vision and goals of the church in mind, and so that they know they are authorized to go ahead and do that. So they can do that with confidence. One of the greatest benefits of putting a plan together is that it gets everyone involved. Rather than just one person deciding what is to be spent, you're going to contact those involved in youth ministry, those involved in children's ministries, or any of the other ministries in the church, and you're going to get their input into how they are going to accomplish the vision and goals of the church. And with their input and with their involvement becomes a greater commitment to seeing that accomplished. And with that greater commitment is going to come a greater involvement in actually giving to the church to see that budget realized and those expectations met. The other thing a good plan does is it generates confidence in the leadership. People are going to follow somebody who knows where they're going. And if you can demonstrate by your spending plan that you have a vision and that you have goals that you're trying to reach, and you're going to use the resources committed to you to see those goals realized, people are going to get excited, they're going to get on board, they're going to follow that, they're going to have greater confidence in the leadership. And finally, it helps you to maintain financial integrity. What I mean by that is that there are seasons in the church when there are greater revenues and when there are lesser revenues, when there are greater times of expense and when there are lesser times of expense. But if you've got a plan that keeps you on a budget, then in those times of greater revenue, you're not going to be tempted to spend those funds because you know you're going to need them later in the year. For example, probably from October to March are the greatest income times for the church. June, July, August, those are the slower times. But if you've got a plan that keeps you on track, then the times of surplus are going to carry you through the times of shorter time. So it just brings discipline to your budget. Now there's a number of different approaches we can take to this budgeting, this planning process. Let's look at three of them. First one would be historical. That's where you simply take a look at what happened in the past and you project it into the future. While this is not helpful in a lot of situations, it does come helpful in situations particularly where you have fixed costs. For example, If you're in the midst of a 5-year term on your mortgage, you know what the mortgage payment was last year, and you can just transpose that into the new budget. It's there, it's fixed, it won't change. The second one is more not historical, but an incremental. So you have an expenditure, you know what it was last year, and you know that it's going to go up by a couple of percentages for the next year, and so you just do an incremental increase for the next year's budget. The challenge with the historical and incremental is that it looks at the past. Past cannot be changed. What you're looking for is the future, and the future can be changed. So the third one is what we call project-based or event-based. The assumption behind it is the question, what does God want us to do? What are we expected to become? And so you build your resources around that idea. It's built around the vision and the values and the goals that you have for your organization and how you're going to accomplish them. It's not money driven, it's vision driven. So how do I actually build a budget? Well, I would suggest that you take the financial statement year to date. Take a look at what income has come in already, what expenses you've already made already. Project that towards the end of the year. For example, if you're at the end of October, you would just take what you've earned now, divided by 10, multiply by 12, and you can project towards the end of the year. Do the same thing with the expenditures. Once you have that historical information, there's some fixed costs there that you can simply transpose to your new budget. The incremental costs, you'll take and you'll add the percentage that you want to increase, transfer that to your new budget. But the main work is going to come in that zero-based part that we talked about earlier. What are the new plans? What are the projects that you've identified? Working with your youth leaders, working with your children's leaders, working with the other ministries of your church. What are the new things that you want to see happen and the resources you want to bring to see that accomplished? Those are the areas that you start prioritizing according to your vision and goals and set those out as your budget for next year. Obviously, your income, you want it to match your expenditures so that you have a balanced budget, and that hopefully you can do that with the projects that you've identified and have in mind. So when you've got your budget put together, what does a healthy spending plan look like? Well, as we've said already, it's going to be vision driven, not money driven. The items that you've identified for income and expenditures are there because they're going to help you meet the vision and the goals that you have established for your church. You don't start by saying, well, how much money do we have? What can we do? You say, what are we asked to do? What is God calling us to do? And what are the resources we need to bring to bear to see that accomplished? Secondly, a healthy budget is going to have a strong outreach component. You're going to have your commitment to your denomination in there, but you're also going to have a strong missions component. Following a Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the earth model. You're going to look after missions in your local area. You'll look after missions overseas. And you're going to have a national component, either through your district or through your national office. Thirdly, a healthy budget is going to provide for the staff in a generous way. Galatians 6:6 says, now he who receives instruction should share all good things with its instructor. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever man sows, that shall he also reap. The church that looks after its staff in a generous way is sowing seeds to the financial health of that church itself. Fourthly, your budget has to have some areas of growth. What's new? What are the things that we've never done before, or maybe never done in the same way before? What are the new components of the budget? How is it reflecting the growth that we want to see through the vision and goals that we've established? And finally, a healthy budget is going to be dynamic. It's not a static document. It's not something set in stone that cannot be changed. For example, you might want to build in a contingency of, some would recommend, up to 5%. What this is funds that are set aside to meet the unexpected. You've done a good job of planning. You've done a good job of preparing according to the plan and the vision that you have, but there's always the unexpected. And you want to be able to respond to that in a way that helps you fulfill the vision and goals that you've set for the church. So it needs to be a dynamic document. Just a couple of final thoughts. Just because it's in the budget doesn't mean it should be spent or can be spent. You want to make sure that you've got the income to cover it. People will come and they'll say, Ron, can we go and make this expenditure now? And I'll have to say, no, not at this point. And they say, well, it's in the budget. It may be, but we haven't had the revenues to cover that, and we don't want to go in a deficit position. So just because it's in the budget doesn't mean it should be spent. And finally, monitor the plan. Building the plan is only half the job. but on a regular monthly basis, follow along to see how you're doing against the plan that you've set. You see, God is going to put into your hand thousands of dollars over the next year. How are you going to steward that in the best way possible? What's the plan?